myself.
Commissioner, incident at Eden Hills overnight. Can you tell us what happened there?
It's very early stages in the investigation. I think most people are aware that we have a man and a small child in a critical condition currently being treated. Obviously very tragic circumstances, but at this stage the indications are that it may be domestic violence related, but it's too early for us to be specific about the causes and exactly what the investigation is going to unfold.
What's the relationship between those two people?
As I said, it's probably too early for me to be any more specific than that.
Has you managed to speak to the man yet? Is he in a statement?
No, the man involved is currently being treated and is in a critical condition, so police aren't able to speak to him at this point.
Do you expect any charges to be laid?
Too early to tell. Once the treatment is provided and we have a clearer picture of exactly what's happened, then we'll look at where we go from there, from the investigation and also the status of the people involved.
What type of gas was it?
I don't know, sorry.
Mr. Fay was presiding over the matter before Stowaways yesterday and expressed surprise that he had no legal recourse to jail these men. He could only fine them 20 grand max. Do you share that surprise that there's no custodial option for it?
No, well, no, I'm aware that there is no custodial penalty available under the Emergency Management Act, and the ability to impose a substantial fine obviously should be a deterrent to most people. The court had that option available to them and chose not to exercise that option. The police approach has been to issue expiation notices to individuals up to $1,000, and we've done that consistently, and we've also issued fines to businesses for a $5,000 amount where we've seen continuous breaches of the regulations.
Just to clarify, he wasn't referring then to the act of stowing away on the train.
Beg your
He
pardon?
wasn't referring to the act of stowing away on the train by saying, I don't have the option to back you up with that.
My understanding is that the offence related to breaching the directions under the Emergency Management Act.
Is it disappointing though that there aren't ways to find these people who blatantly breach these laws?
Well, it's probably a lesson for SA Police. We have the ability to issue an expiation notice under the Emergency Management Act, and we have been doing that. The decision to arrest these 4 individuals obviously was taken to eliminate the risk from the community from these people moving freely throughout South Australia. We'll be looking at our approach going forward in terms of making sure that we prevent any risk to people who breach our directions by illegally entering South Australia, ensuring that they receive an expiation and that we put them in quarantine and then get rid of them out of South Australia as quickly as possible.
So
you
what
take
will
them
happen
into
to them
police
after
custody
their
after
quarantine?
What's the same question?
What will happen to them after their quarantine?
They're only being quarantined until such time as we can escort them out of South Australia, back to Victoria.
If somebody does stow away, what's your understanding is the worst that can happen is they get an expiation notice?
Well, the court has...
On a day-to-day basis, right?
If police were to deal with it, we can issue a $1,000 expiation notice on the spot. If we put them before a court has at its disposal a maximum fine of $20,000 for an individual and $75,000, I think, for a body corporate.
In terms of the quarantine, who is fully billed for that?
My understanding is that SA Health are absorbing the cost of that quarantine in the interest of ensuring that these people don't present a risk to the South Australian community. Given their antecedents, we have no confidence that they would abide by any directions to quarantine at a place of their choosing. So the sensible decision is to hold them in a supervised quarantine facility until they can be removed from South Australia.
Can you imagine how that would be frustrating to South Australian taxpayers?
I think it's a balance. I think most South Australian taxpayers would be happy that we were expending this money to ensure that we're not creating a risk from COVID-19 finding its way into the South Australian community. I think it's a sensible decision.
The inconclusive test from yesterday, do you have any update on the results of that? And where did that person come from?
That's probably a question that should be referred to health. We're waiting for the final details on that as well.
But did they come from a place that is of particular concern to police?
I don't have specifics on that one. I do know that the person was properly managed as they came into South Australia, so there was no risk presenting from their arrival. It's just simply a matter of finding out the full details from health when they're available.
Just in terms of the Stowaways, you're obviously waiting for their test results to come back. That normally takes about 24 hours.
Yes.
So could we see them back in Victoria or heading back to Victoria today?
Quite possibly. Once the results are in, that we'll be shipping them out. They won't be staying in South Australia.
Do you have any idea of how many other breaches, maybe not of that nature, but how many other breaches have been committed since that hard border's come into play?
The hard border arrangement covers off on virtually all opportunities for people to sneak across the border into South Australia, but given the nature of our border between South Australia and Victoria and New South Wales, it is virtually impossible to block every single access point. And if a person is diligent enough, they will find a way to sneak through. So we don't know whether or not people are finding their way through, but we do know that we are dramatically impacting on a significant volume, and people are generally complying with our instructions.
I guess due to that, do you think that the laws and regulations around those people who do find ways to get in should be stricter, because they're obviously doing everything they can to avoid your patrols?
Well, I still think an individual receiving a $1,000 fine is a pretty swift sanction, bearing in mind that if we detect a person like that, then we make sure that their behaviours after that point aren't going to be a risk to the South Australian community. We will remove them from South Australia, or we will hold them in quarantine until they no longer present a risk.
Do you have any judgment on
I've been out talking to our police on our border control checkpoints. One of the questions I have been asking, are you turning many people around? And not many people are being turned away. Some are, because they haven't got the necessary conditions to enter South Australia. And obviously there's a level of frustration amongst those people, but they're accepting the decision and they are turning around.
Is there any need to be checking trains or trucks or, to warn people like that?
We are doing random checks of freight movement across Australia, looking for passengers and what you might call stowaways. There is very minimal train movement into South Australia. Freight trains are obviously now something that we're looking at, and we'll be elevating our surveillance of freight train movement. Bus and other transport is being well managed at this point.
Just back on the incident at Eden, it was obviously quite disturbing. What's it been like for the officers there on the ground? Have they been pretty disturbed by it?
Look, I can speak from personal experience, and I think most police officers can as well. When you're involved in a set of circumstances that involves injury or harm to a small child, it does make the job that much more difficult, and there's a personal toll that comes with dealing with those sorts of situations, and we do as much as we can to look after police in those circumstances, but you can't take away the fact that you're dealing with a tragic set of circumstances that can have a personal impact.
Did they need to force their way into the bedroom?
I don't have that detail.
Okay. And speaking about what you've just said, can I ask you about yesterday's crash at Shearer? Well, that's obviously another tragedy involving a toddler. How hard was it for your people on the ground, your victim support people, breaking that news? I mean, how hard is that?
I have a huge amount of pride for the people who work in our major crash investigation section, and I take my hat off to the way they go about their job, their professionalism, their courage and ability to repeatedly knock on doors and pass on that tragic news to families about a death or a serious injury. It's one of the most difficult jobs a police officer can do, and these people do it time and time again. It's quite impressive that they can actually perform to the level they do, and their professionalism is outstanding.
Are you investigating if the driver suffered a medical episode? Do you expect charges could be laid?
It's too early for me to make any comment in relation to the cause for the crash, but as you would appreciate, all of the circumstances are being investigated.
And are you investigating if the truck driver acted negligently by leaving?
As I said, all of the circumstances regarding that incident will be investigated, and if there are charges relating to any particular person involved, then they'll obviously proceed.
Final questions.
Is the Indian News incident being investigated as a suicide?
At this moment, we are investigating the circumstances. I wouldn't speculate on the outcome. As I said, both the child and the man involved are in a critical condition, being treated at hospital.
Is the family known to the Department of Child Protection?
I don't have that information.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. See you.